Hey guys, it's me, Kim. It's been a long time. I shouldn't have left you, but I'm back. Happy New Year. And because it's been such a long time, I decided to give you a very long, very in-depth video. I'm sure y'all saw the title of this video. This is going to be a fact check of Candace Owens. Now look, this is my second Candace Owens video, and I don't want people to get the wrong idea because I don't have no personal beef with this girl. I actually quite like her. I've taken some time after watching her sit down with Russell Brand, who I have some mixed emotions about him. While I was watching her talk, I was like, oh, that's wrong, and that's wrong. Oh, and that's really wrong. So that's how we got to a fact check video. So let's get into it.
One of the things that harmed the Black community the most over these last 60 years has been the welfare state. It's what's happening in France right now. It doesn't work. It doesn't, giving handouts and creating a giant government and not creating, incentives for people to work, which is what people want to do. It's the human spirit that governments don't seem to understand and that policies that are socialist don't seem to understand. They don't account for the human spirit. We want to be valuable. We want to create. So when you remove all of that, you end up with people that are oppressed and with a variety of problems. And you can pick a ton of problems within the Black community that I'm trying to reverse. And it all starts with abandoning the victim mentality.
Why is it that we only talk about victim mentality when it's poor people or people of color or women or LGBT folks who are seeking redress for our grievances? Why is that only aimed at us? Because we see across the world angry white people taking to the streets, setting stuff on fire, taking over government buildings, harassing private companies because they feel like their governments have failed them. We don't refer to the Tea Party as having a victim mentality. Let's go back about a decade ago. Mostly white folks in this country decided a decade ago that they had had enough. Right? That they didn't want to be in Obama's socialist America, so they took to the streets with their weapons and made not so thinly veiled threats against the president because they felt that they were being wronged by the government. Now, I did not hear anybody on the right refer to those protesters as having a victim mentality. White people are the only people in this country imagined to have legitimate grievances. And that's the issue here, right? Because when Candace is talking about victim mentality, she's not just talking about people who say that they've been wronged. She's making a value judgment about who has a legitimate claim. And for her and lots of other conservatives, the only people in this country who have the right to bitch about anything are white men. So when white folks say that they've been discriminated against because they're white, or when men say they've been discriminated against because they're men, we don't hear people say that they're being victims. Certainly not Candace. Certainly not a lot of conservatives. And I guarantee you that if Candace went to West Virginia, if she sat in with a group of poor white folks from West Virginia, coal miners, and they talked about how shitty this country has been to them, okay, and why they voted for Obama in 2012 and why they voted for Trump in 2016, she wouldn't tell those people that they're being victims. She wouldn't tell those people to get over themselves and their victim mentality. No. She would say, yeah, you have been screwed over. Yeah, it sucks that you can't give your kids the life that they deserve or the life that you want for them. It sucks that your jobs are gone, that you're not going to be able to pay for your children's college. She would say that. We know she would say that because that is what conservatives say to those poor white folks all the time. They say to them, yeah, you got a raw deal. And they say to poor Black people, get over it. And that's my issue. The issue is that MAGA and Donald Trump's entire campaign leading up to his presidency was rooted in white male victimhood. That's what Make America Great Again is. It's, we gotta make America great again for you because shit sucks for you. Fuck the rest of them. So until we're going to be honest about who gets to be affirmed in their victimhood in this country, I don't want to hear nothing else about no victim mentality. No. Now, obviously, I disagree with the claim that the welfare state is the cause of Black people's problems in this country, obviously. But But let's take a step back here, because one thing that conservatives can never explain is why is it that other countries, like Western countries with far greater social safety nets, right? Much bigger welfare states. Why is it that they have lower unemployment than we do? Why do they have lower infant mortality than we do? Why do they live longer lives than we do? In the New York Times, a man named Henrik Jacobson Clevens said that there's lower unemployment in a lot of European countries that have huge social safety nets because those public benefits actually help people get to work. So you're probably going to be able to work if you have subsidized childcare or good public transportation, or if you're able to be healthy because of the healthcare system that pays for everything. France is not revolting against socialism, or socialism is not the cause of the yellow vest protests that have been happening for the past couple of months. Girl, what? You just made that up. What's happening in France right now is hundreds of thousands of working class people are taken to the streets. They're putting on their yellow vests. French people are required to have yellow vests in their cars. That's why everybody has them. And they are protesting Julian Macron. So I think we get this confused because Julian Macron is young and he's kind of cute, if you squint, but he's not progressive. He has slashed taxes on the wealthy and tried to pass those taxes off, those fuel taxes off on working class and middle class people. That's why they're revolting. He's also rolled back protections for workers. That's why they're revolting. The people in France are saying the government is not doing enough to ensure that I have a good life, and they're giving too much preference to rich people. Now, that is an agenda that I can get behind.
This morning, before heading to the roundabout, they check their accounts.
Of course we should pay tax. But it's too much. It's over the top.
They get rid of the tax on the rich and then make us pay. Something's not right. Why did they get rid of the tax on the wealthy? We're really struggling. The people on 1,000, 1,200 euros. Once we've paid the bills, there's nothing left.
Thomas and Virginie have decided to protest in Paris.
The Yellow Vest protesters want to tax the rich. I want to tax the rich. We agree. So I don't know what Candace is talking about, but let's just hear people speak for themselves. And again, we, as in like the collective we, the universal we, are able to view the Yellow Vest protesters as sympathetic victims, despite the fact that they are doing a lot of kind of wacky stuff over there, because they're white.
The greatest challenge and also the most fun, I think, that I have on these college campuses is that you want to see if a black person, you want to see who the real racists are, tell people that as a black person, you don't see yourself as a victim. They lose their goddamn minds. That's why they hate me. Read the articles about me. They call me a neo-Nazi. I mean, The Guardian, right? Neo-Nazi, supporter of white supremacy because I believe that I can do whatever I want in my life because I have confidence. What does that tell you? That they're rushing to smear me because I believe that black people can do it without government handouts.
Oh, this is like an old school black Republican talking point. Oh my God, so funny. Okay, so first of all, I don't care what you see yourself as. I don't care if you see yourself as a black woman, a victim, whatever. That don't have anything to do with me. The problem is when you attempt to deny the existence of structural racism, classism, sexism, homophobia. That makes no sense, because in my mind, attempting to deny those structural forces that can be observed and quantified over time is as ridiculous as denying the existence of climate change or gravity. So you could stick your head in the sand and say, doesn't affect me, but your feet are still on the ground and the earth is still getting warmer. So the issue is not that Candace thinks that she's just the smartest and most hardworking black person to ever walk the face of the earth, that she can do whatever she wants. Fine. She then has to parrot racist right-wing talking points. And one of those talking points is about how black people are takers and not makers. We see Candace over and over again parrot the fiction that black people are lazy and abusing, quote, government handouts. Now that feeds into old racist narratives about who we are and what we do. You know, Candace is saying, well, I just want black people to know that we can do it without government handouts. When in reality, nobody in this country is doing it without a government handout. Everybody is taking from the government. So let's be clear that the government gives all sorts of people handouts. Pell Grants, low interest home, student, business loans, tax breaks, tax incentives. Do you know that the states of New York and Virginia gave Amazon billions of dollars to bring their company there? Do you know that Amazon pays $0 in federal income tax? But somehow these states find billions of dollars to throw at this privately owned business when there is no guarantee that there's going to be a meaningful impact on their local economies. When there are natural disasters in this country and red states get billions of dollars in aid, billions of dollars to rebuild their communities, despite the fact that red states give less money to the government than blue states? Is that a government handout? Now, at this point, Donald Trump has spent about 154 days at properties he owns golfing, and the government picks up the tab for his transportation and his protection. This man is getting millions of dollars to facilitate something that has nothing to do with his job. The government foots the bill. Now, is that a handout? Now, why is it that when we're talking about giving poor people food to eat, a place to live, money to live, that we call it handouts? But when it's anybody else, we call it subsidies or aid or benefits or tax cuts.
I tell people that the biggest problem facing the black community is father absence, but that's being incentivized by our government. So the black single motherhood rate was 23% in 1960s before welfare programs were implemented. Today it's 74% in the black community. That's because they literally will give a black mother more money from the government if the father doesn't live in the home. I really believe in a two-parent home. You can just look at the statistics to see that children are better off when they have two parents. But think about what's perpetuated in our media. Think about radicalized feminism. We can do it without men. F men. We hate men.
The removal of black men from black communities is a huge issue, but framing this as a welfare issue is again wrong. When we're talking about the diminished health of black communities, welfare is not the place that you gotta start. You gotta talk about the restructuring of our economy that disadvantages people with low education, and you have to talk about mass incarceration. But first, real fast, let's get into what Candace is talking about here. So let's bring up this graphic. So conservatives love to point to what James Q. Wilson calls Moynihan Scissors. That's the point where we see unemployment for black men go down, but claims for welfare go up. And that's how we get that X shape. And so conservatives like Candace say, it's welfare. Black people decided we didn't want to work and we were gonna break up our homes and get on welfare. Welfare was created for single white mothers, and they were the primary beneficiaries of that system until the 60s. In the 60s, we see those programs open up to black people finally, and that's when we see that sharp increase of welfare claims. So Susan Greenbaum spells this out in her book, Blaming the Poor, The Long Shadow of the Moynihan Report on Cruel Images About Poverty. And if you look at that chart, you're going to misinterpret it if you don't have all of the context. An important piece of missing context is that while overall unemployment for black men was going down, unemployment for young black men was going up. It was up at one point to like 27%. That means 1 in 4 black men who were looking for jobs were unemployed. That number doesn't even take into account the number of men who are not even in the job market. We know that young black men are the people who are going to be fathering the children. We have an enormous number of young black men who are not able to provide for their families because they don't have income. We have that happening at the same time as now suddenly black people, black women in particular, are able to actually get welfare benefits. Greenbaum makes this point by citing contemporary analysis. People were debunking these myths about welfare and black people even in the 60s. You have to do a lot to just ignore all of that analysis that was happening at the time. If you're a man with poor job prospects, you're not going to get married. We know that. Now, how do we know that black folks are not just culturally inferior and hate marriage? We know that Because those same trends happen among white folks and Latinos. Look at this graph. Over the past decade or two, there have been tons of books and articles written about why young, poor people do not get married. Marriage is now most common among older, educated people. I am not going to deny that our welfare systems need to be revamped. They do, in their current iteration, disadvantage two-parent households. You know, even people who are in charge of administering the TANF block grants have said this has to change because it's hurting people. Though I have to point out that according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics in 2014, more than half of the households that qualified for means-tested benefit programs were two-parent households. Now, in the actual Moynihan report, Moynihan did not put forth any policy prescriptions, which he absolutely should have. Moynihan, who worked in LBJ's Department of Labor and later became a senator, and he was a Harvard professor at one point, he was a sociologist. He argued what needed to happen was the government needed to come in and provide these families with a minimal basic income. That's what Moynihan was advocating in the 60s and 70s. Give people money to live. Otherwise, their families are going to be completely messed up. I agree. The economy is doing fine now. We see increases in all sorts of jobs, particularly low-wage work. But you are not paying attention if you think that these trends can continue indefinitely. They just cannot. We are moving towards an automated society. And that means that people who don't go to college are going to have a really, really tough time in the job market. It is what it is. So we've got to figure out what is going to happen to those people. I absolutely endorse a minimum basic income. So let's hear people in Detroit talk about what is going on.
The job's not done until you get those neighborhoods restored, and that is incredibly complicated because you're talking about an entire generation of people who don't have the skills, as far as we can tell, to survive in a modern economy.
I believe 38% of the jobs in the city require a degree of some kind, which is relatively high. Even for most major cities, it's a pretty high number. And the problem is that we have an education system that is failing. Detroit schools are a failure. It's hard to understate how important that is and how critical that is for the livelihood of the city and the future of the city as these people get out into the world. You know, the real big issue is that, so for instance, 71% of the jobs in the city are held by people that live in the suburbs that look like me. Largely a white population.
The automotive industry is still the driver of the Metro Detroit economy. We don't have the assembly plants that we used to have before. It's more of a white-collar office, research and develop, engineer kind of thing now than it was a labor thing before.
The automotive industry has spiked so well back up. Like I said, 15 and 16 were U.S. automotive sale records. They haven't seen profits like these in the history of the automotive sector. But the issue is we're still 250,000 jobs short of what we were in 2000.
And despite all of that low-wage work that's coming back, it is not equivalent to the kinds of low-wage work that used to be able to support families. We have a growing economy, there are lots of new jobs, wages are rising, but not at a rate that makes sense with the amount of job growth that we have. And that's a real problem. It means that you're working harder and getting less for it. You've got to do something for those people and get very serious about it, because everybody is not going to go to college and be a STEM major. Everybody is not going to be an entrepreneur. All right, I know we're all over the place, we're jumping around, but let's go back to that big jump. Let's look at the graph again. The other cause for that big increase in welfare enrollment is that Black people are moving from the South, where they had no access to welfare, to the North, where receiving welfare benefits became a possibility. Again, before the 60s, the welfare program was incredibly racist and discriminatory. Black people having access to the benefits that U.S. citizens get is a good thing. Greenbaum again outlines in her book, when Black people in the South recognize that they can leave the South, go to the North, get a job, or apply for benefits, they're no longer tied to their racist, exploitative employers. One of the reasons why Southern employers could treat their workers so badly is because there were no options. Increased access to welfare benefits during that time opened up options for millions of Black Americans. And again, you know, Candace loves to talk about fatherlessness, right? Like, that is what's plaguing us, fatherlessness. You're not even having a legitimate conversation about fatherlessness if you're not talking about mass incarceration. But here's what Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote in 2015. By 2000, more than 1 million black children had a father in jail or prison, and roughly half of those fathers were living in the same household as their kids when they were locked up. Paternal incarceration is associated with behavior problems and delinquency, especially among boys. Oh my God, so much information.
But for me to deny that there is an impact of social, economic and historic conditions on the individual experience of people, and and those conditions are not affected by race, for me, I don't think that's true, Candace.
No, well, first off, I want to go to your two articles because you used the word myopic. Okay, you used a sample of two articles to come up with this great conclusion.
It's Raheem Sterling's.
Is every single, I understand that, is every single article about a black person buying a house negative? Or did you find one that was and do a comparative analysis?
Hold on a minute, it's Raheem Sterling.
Hold on. Is every single article of a white person buying a house positive? Or did you find an article of a white person positive, and now you've used this to say that this means that every single white person that an article is written about is true or false? I have a problem with this data set, and this is what we see over and over again. It's the same thing that they do when they extract the 16 unarmed black men that are shot and killed by police officers every year. Forget to mention that there's a higher rate.
This is so dishonest, you guys. This is so dishonest. I'm American, so I'm going to speak from the American context. We have decades of research on media bias and the effects of the consumption of media bias. This is a real thing, and it affects how people view minorities. So here are a few examples. Here is one study on the bias on how celebrity men who get caught abusing their partners is reported. Here's a study that shows how in New York, about half of the crimes in New York City are committed by black people. But on the news, black people are shown to be criminals about 75% of the time. And here's a study about how black people are overrepresented as poor on television, and how seeing that overrepresentation affects how people view means-tested benefit programs. People don't like means-tested aid when they think that black people are predominantly getting it. White people are absolutely not killed more by police. No way. That's just not true. It's just false. Let's look at some work that The Guardian did. Let's look at this graph. Black people are disproportionately killed, particularly when they're unarmed. Tracking police killings is difficult because police don't like to give up good data about their killings. And there's no central database. But from the evidence that we have, no. White people do not suffer more from police shootings. It's really annoying to me that somebody who says that she is so pro-black and wants to help the black community, again, doesn't do the reading. Did not come to class prepared. All right, we're getting through it. We're getting through it. Let's move on to this.
The data is in on incarceration of young black men in America,
because
for example.
we disproportionately commit crimes in America. So are we not supposed to be arrested because we're
black? But
black?
you're doing the same thing there, Candace. You're extracting that bit of data without saying, well, what are the economic conditions of most young black men in America?
But now we're agreeing.
And what's the history?
You're missing this. No, you're missing this. I agree that we are economically depressed as black Americans. What I'm talking about, what we disagree on, is the solution. Okay?
Well, you don't know what I think the solution is.
So we've been economically depressed because we've bought into the myth that government is going to fix our problems. We have disproportionately been voting for Democrats for the last 60 years. Okay? So all of our problems is because black Americans disproportionately take welfare programs. We disproportionately...
So we might not disagree on the solution.
I guess we're not disagreeing.
Hey, let's all vote
in this
Democrat.
moment, that's right. So I guess in this moment we're not disagreeing. You're saying that I'm ignoring the fact that they've been economically depressed, and that economical depression then leads to higher crime rates. I agree with all of that. Okay? What we disagree on, or perhaps what people disagree with me on a lot, are the solutions for it. Okay? And I point out the fact of how we got here.
What's your solution?
If you don't understand how we got here in terms of buying into the idea that the government was going to fix everything.
All right. Now, because you think it's all this victim mentality stuff.
It is. We have to talk about mass incarceration because it is such a big deal. And it is crazy, right? If we're going to talk about what's happened to Black America, what's happened to Black men, Black fathers, Black families, you cannot talk about that without talking about the explosion of the criminal justice system. Okay. So back in 2015, the New York Times did a really big write-up about this, and they asked, where are the Black men? Where are they? Well, it turns out that they're in prison or dead. That's where they are. They're gone. Over the past 30 to 40 years, the U.S. prison system has removed a generation, and now we're coming up on a generation and a half of young black men from their communities. That has huge consequences. The United States has 5% of the world's population and 25% of the world's prisoners. That's a policy choice. So black people do commit more crimes than white people. That's just a fact. But it turns out that imprisonment disparity is not just because of a disparity in committing actual crime. So over the past decade, there's been a couple of studies that show that up to 40% of that disparity in imprisonment is not just because of the disparity in actual rates of crime. It's the result of racial bias. That means black people are more likely to be arrested than white folks, and we are more likely to get harsher punishment. Not to mention the fact that locking up all of these people doesn't really do a whole lot to make us safer. The decrease in the crime rate in this country that's a result of locking all these people up is like between 2 and 5%. But the destabilization that happens in these communities happens on a huge scale, and these communities are destabilized for decades. And there are lots of really egregious examples of disparities in imprisonment. For example, black people are not more likely than white people to use drugs, but they are much more likely to be imprisoned for selling and using drugs. And in places like New York City and New Orleans, black people are much more likely to be arrested for the ridiculous crime of possession of marijuana. And again, black men get much longer sentences than white men for committing the exact same offenses. And we know that there's something really wrong with the prison system because even as the crime rate was falling in this country, the rate of incarceration was rising. Candace is a black conservative who says that there are no structural barriers for black achievement in the United States. Like, they're all gone. Obviously that's not true. But here's the late sociologist DeVaughn Pager explaining how mass incarceration affects all black people.
In the case of black testers, 14% of those with no criminal background received a callback or job offer, relative to just 5% of blacks with a criminal record. When we compare the outcomes of the black and white testers side by side, what's most striking is the direct effect of race on the outcomes of these young men. A black applicant with no criminal background received callbacks or job offers at about half the rate of an equally qualified white applicant. But the most surprising finding was really related to blacks with no criminal background relative to whites with a felony conviction. We find that a white applicant with a felony conviction fared just as well, if not better, relative to a black applicant with a clean record. This suggests that being black in America today is essentially like having a felony conviction in terms of one's chances of finding employment.
It is, and they've been able to sell. The easiest person to sell socialism to is a wealthy person. Go to Hollywood. They're like the number one socialist because they feel guilty about
socialism.
It's true. No, but because they feel guilty about their wealth. You are the perfect stereotype of somebody that I could get to grow government with. Russell, look at these poor people. Look at how well you live. Look at this podcast studio. Don't you feel bad as a white straight male that all this is going on? Oh, of course, yes. What should I do? Use your platform to tell people that this is wrong and that you become the voice that actually allows people to grow government. And what it does is
it's not true that wealthy people are more likely to be progressive or socialist or whatever word Candace wants to use. It's just not true. Let's take a look at the exit poll data from 2018. Just made up. It's just a made up thing. Like, what are you saying? What are you saying?
It's working in America. This is why this is the lowest rate ever for black unemployment is right now under Donald Trump, who is allegedly the most racist president if you read The Guardian, right? Like, he's so racist. Well, he sucks at racism because black Americans are doing so much better. There's been a 400% increase in black-owned businesses because there's opportunities. He's making sure that there are actually opportunities.
Do you believe in these sort of figures?
Do I believe in them?
Yeah, those sort of figures when people, when governments go, and we found out that...
Really quickly right here, Candace just said something that was completely false. That 400% number sounds fake because it is fake. So PolitiFact found that number that conservatives cite over and over again is from an email survey. An email survey. And it has been so widely misrepresented that the company in charge of that survey has had to send out notices like, y'all are getting the wrong idea. Like, this is not real. This interview with Candace was so long and so full of nonsense that I just had to say, you know what? I'm done. So this is going to be the last point that I'll refute.
It's not, if you're
don't think
saying
it's
to me that
unfair?
because some person is less driven than me, I was able to accomplish more and I was rewarded for it, that's unfair. No, that's not unfair. As long as we are provided the same opportunities, which in America, our system is if you work hard and you're willing to work hard, you will be rewarded.
So the crux of conservatism really is that your choices dictate the outcome of your life. Now, to me, that's laughable. It's laughable because we have so much information that tells us that in the United States, equal talent, skill, knowledge, commitment, ambition are not rewarded equally across the socioeconomic spectrum. It is crazy to argue that, like full on ridiculous. Didn't we just hear DeVaughn Pager say that black men with no criminal record have less of a chance of being called back to a job than a white person with a criminal record? There's so many other studies that basically say the same thing. In 2014, S. Michael Gaddis found that a black person who graduates from an elite university like Duke, Stanford, or Harvard has just about the same chance of being called in for a job interview as a white person who went to a state school. In this experiment, everything about the applicants was the same except for the name. So people with black names who went to good schools got called back less. So we've already established that Republicans are obsessed with marriage. They are obsessed with marriage in a way that really doesn't make sense. So look, I'm not unreasonable. I pay attention to real facts. So I acknowledge that there are quite a few studies that say that children do better in two-parent households for a number of reasons. But there is something that marriage cannot fix. And that is structural racism. So last year, there was this huge study by Chetty Hendren, Jones, and Porter. Had to look up those names. It's a lot of names. Now, the study was huge because it found that for black men, no matter if they were raised in a single-parent home or a two-parent home, and no matter how much money their parents made, they are never able to close the black-white income gap. And we also know that a black two-parent home has a median wealth that is actually less than that of a white single-parent home. And according to the Brookings Institution, if you're a black woman, it doesn't even help your financial prospects to marry a black man because they don't have any money either. So if we look at this graph, we see that white men and white women who are married actually have a higher chance of escaping their initial socioeconomic status because they're able to combine assets and rise up that socioeconomic ladder. It's just not the same for black people. And finally, let's go back to this myth of American exceptionalism. People still believe in that Horatio Alger myth of you can pull yourself up by your bootstraps and it's so easy, and that's what America is built on. What's really interesting is that social mobility in the United States is actually quite low when compared to other Western developed nations. It's also interesting that those countries that have better class mobility also have, larger social safety nets. A little bit more on class mobility. So an economist like Raj Chetty, for example, says that class mobility actually hasn't decreased. There are lots of people who disagree with him, but whether or not we say class mobility has decreased over the past few decades or stayed constant over the past few decades, what we know for sure is that income and wealth inequality have increased exponentially over the past 50 years. That means that the people at the very, very top are hoarding their wealth. They're not sharing the gains in productivity or labor with the people who are actually doing the work. And that means that the lives of the average American are not improving. We're working longer hours and getting less stuff. That's a problem. That's why so many people are feeling this economic anxiety. The point that conservatives love to hammer home. They're like, it's about equality and opportunity and not outcome. Well, guess what? We don't have equality and opportunity. Back to the work of Raj Chetty. In some parts of the country, class mobility is much more likely. You're much more likely to go from the bottom to the top in a place like Silicon Valley, and you're least likely to go from the bottom to the top in a place like Mississippi. Now, that has nothing to do with how hard you work. It's just an accident of your birth. Thank you so much for getting to the end of this video. Now look, I really wanted to take some time to point out this stuff because everybody has an agenda. I openly have an agenda, and my agenda is to help people live the best lives that they can. I want to make sure that people have food to eat, that they can go to well-resourced schools, that they can pay for college and health care and have a place to live. And other people have different agendas. But I do think that I support the positions that I do, not just because they make me feel good and warm and fuzzy and because it sucks to see people struggling, because this stuff is backed up by data. We are so lucky that we have scholars who dedicate their lives to researching this stuff. And it is really frustrating to me when we have people come out here and just say whatever, and it's not rooted in anything but like meanness and this myth of America. I will always say that the fundamental difference between a liberal and a conservative is liberals believe that people should be helped and conservatives believe that people should be punished. I'm okay with helping people. I'm okay with that. It makes me feel good. Thank you guys so much for reaching the end of this video. I did make a bonus companion video. It's up on Patreon right now. It's me putting on my makeup and talking about how I feel about Black conservatives and their tactics and their aims and their damage. So go check that out right now if you are a Patreon patron. You can sign up there, sign up for our email newsletter. Send me an email. I am back. I'm glad to be making videos again. It's fun. I'm glad. I miss you guys. Bye.